I'm going to be doing a two-part series right now on something I have been thinking about. It's my favorite sermon ever. It's The Weight of Glory by C.S. Lewis, and it's absolutely extraordinary. And it's an academic, it's preached to an academic community, so you're going to see that in there. But I think we're going to be able to glean a great deal out of this remarkable sermon. So we can just put this up here, and I'm going to be using this image here. And it's preached originally as a sermon in the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, and it was in June 8th of 1942, so during the war years. And I know that church very well because it was right across the street from my college. And I went to Oriel College, right across the high street is where this church was. And I've been in there multiple times as a result of that. And it was here's a kind of an interesting overview here where it gives a picture of it. Looking at it, it's just splendid, the architecture in that area, of course. And this is a kind of a magical place because, as you'll see, this is the pulpit where he would have preached this sermon. And it's interesting to envision the audience there hearing this whoop, went over their heads. I mean, there's no way you can capture this sermon by hearing it one time. You'll get a good impression, but because I've read it a dozen times, more than that, and it's just every time I read it, oh, there's something new. How did I miss this? He compressed so much. But it creates a longing in me for a better world, and it creates a connection with what I think we should be thinking about. And I find I resonate with it now more than I did then because heaven is becoming more amplified in my vision. I'm running out of years. July 22nd, I'm going to have my 80th birthday. Can you imagine I'm going to be an octogenarian? I can't. How did that happen? I look in, there's the young me saying, what happened? You know, I look in the mirror, what happened? It's a strange, we all experience this. It's a strange process. You've heard me say age conspires with God to transfer our hope from the temporal to the eternal. Well, it's forcing me to realize that. And living with that in mind. After all, the psalmist says, as for the days of our life, it used to be the name of a soap opera, The Days of Our Life, and I think that's where they picked it up from, this Psalm 90. As for the days of our life, they contain 70 years, or if due to strength, 80, but then they soon fly away and we're gone. So how much time? I'm on borrowed time. And we all are really, in one way or another, everyone here is living on borrowed time to accomplish unfinished business. So I've often sat in here and heard sermons and things like this, and so I want to envision what it'll be like. So I'm just going to kind of take you through this and just highlight some things for you, and I'm just going to walk you through this sermon and just pull out some comments and see what we can do together with this and tie some threads together. He says, if you ask 20 good men today what they thought the highest of the virtues, 19 of them would reply unselfishness. But if you asked almost any of the great Christians of old, he would have replied love. Isn't that an interesting perspective here? You see what has happened? A negative term has been substituted for a positive, and this is of more than philological importance. The negative ideal of unselfishness carries with it the suggestion not primarily of securing good things for others, but of going without them for ourselves, as if our abstinence and not their happiness was the important point. I do not think this is the Christian virtue of love. So he's saying, actually, we've got it wrong. We're looking at it from a negative standpoint, and there's something more that the scriptures offer and that the biblical vision of life gives us than just unselfishness. In fact, we don't desire enough is what he's going to be arguing. It's not a matter of being unselfish. You see, God has wired you and me for profit, hasn't he? He's wired you to pursue gain. You can't help it. It's just the question is going to be, how do you define profit? How do you define gain? And so what fills that gap? So he goes on to say, the New Testament has lots to say about self-denial, but not about self-denial as an end in itself. We're told to deny ourselves and to take up our crosses in order that we may follow Christ. And nearly every description of what we shall ultimately find, if we do so, contains an appeal to desire. And therein lies the thing. This is why I ask this question every day of my life now. What do you seek? What do you desire? What do you want more than anything else? The heart wants something. And the question is that something big enough to sustain you and me, or am I settling for lesser goods? So do I desire enough? So what do you seek? And my answer, as you know, is that I may know you more clearly, and that is a good thing, because to know him, to have him, is to have everything together. But you see, it's an appeal to what you desire, not what you're trying to avoid. So he goes on to say, if there lurks in most modern minds the notion that to desire our own good and earnestly to hope for the enjoyment of it is a bad thing, I submit that this notion has crept in from Kant and the Stoics and is no part of the Christian faith. And this is one of his most famous expressions in the sermon. If we consider, he says, the unblushing promises of reward and the staggering nature of the rewards promised in the Gospels, it would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased. That's a brilliant statement. And I think a lot of men live their lives building mud pies. And some people say, I have more mud than you. Yeah, but I have a better... Yeah, but mine is of a better quality mud than yours. You'd see how stupid that would be. But if you call it money, then it's okay. You see? How does that happen? Because it's just mud. At the end of the day, what's it going to do for us in the day of eternity, you see? Am I building a portfolio? And you have to pursue profit, but make sure what you define as profit won't let you down in the end. That's the whole key here. So if anything, we continue making them because we don't even know what is meant. We're too easily pleased. We settle for too little is what he's trying to say. And I think that's a powerful part of the sermon. We must not be troubled by unbelievers who say that this promise of reward makes the Christian life a mercenary affair, because that's immediately when you hear rewards, oh, it's mercenary. You just want rewards and so forth. But he goes on to say, and just speaks about that, there is the reward which has no natural connection with the things you do to earn it, and it is quite foreign to the desires that ought to accompany those things. Money is not the natural reward of love. That is why we call a man mercenary if he marries a woman for the sake of her money. But marriage is the proper reward for a real lover, and he is not mercenary for desiring it. A general who fights well in order to get a peerage is mercenary. A general who fights for victory is not. Victory being the proper reward of battle, as marriage is the proper reward of love. The proper rewards are not simply tacked onto the activity for which they're given. They're the activity in consummation. Do you see the concept here? So you want something, but what you're looking for, this reward, is the thing itself. It's not mercenary to be tacked on, but to know him and become like him is not a mercenary good. It's actually a higher good than the world could offer. He says there's a third case, which is more complicated, and this is where he gets into more of an academic kind of a context, where the enjoyment of Greek poetry is certainly a proper but not a mercenary reward for learning Greek. Now, you haven't been studying Greek poetry of late, but you get the analogy here. It still works no matter what. Whatever you're going to study. Not only those who have reached the stage of enjoying Greek poetry can tell from their own experience that this is so. The schoolboy beginning Greek grammar cannot look forward to his adult enjoyment of Sophocles as a lover looks forward to a marriage or a general to a victory. He has to begin by working for marks, or to escape punishment, or to please his parents, or at best in the hope of a future good which he cannot at present imagine or desire. In other words, he's learning it not because he loves the stuff, but because he's forced to do so, and he has to do the best he can do with it. But that's not really what's going to go on. There's something more. He says his position bears a certain resemblance to that of the mercenary. The rewards he's going to get will in fact, actual fact, be a natural, proper reward, but he won't know that until he has got it. Of course, he gets it gradually. Enjoyment creeps in upon the mere drudgery. Have you ever had an experience where you begin to learn a craft or a skill or a knowledge, and then at first it was a drudgery, but then after a while you came to love it for itself? And that's what he's talking about. After a while, it actually has more than just getting marks or just getting it for grades or whatever that, or for advancement. And he goes on to say, nobody can point to the day or an hour when one ceased and the other began, but it is just insofar as he approaches the reward that he becomes able to desire it for its own sake. Indeed, the power of so desiring is itself a preliminary reward. And so he says, but we have not yet attained it, cannot know it in the same way, and cannot even begin to know it at all except by continuing to obey and finding the first reward of our obedience and our increasing power to desire the ultimate reward. Just in proportion as the desire grows, our fear lest it should be a mercenary desire will die away and be recognized as an absurdity. But probably this will not, for most of us, happen in a day. Poetry replaces grammar. Gospel replaces law. Longing transforms obedience. You get that? That's a gem. I want you to hear that again, because poetry, after a while, you get away from the rules and the drudgery, and you begin to see what it's really about. You see, you begin to love it for itself. Gospel replaces the law. That's why I love it every time I go through when I hear the Bible, as you know, I do it with the U version, and every time I get to the end of Malachi, it's suddenly I go to Matthew, and whoop, it's like this incredible thing where did this come from? You see, this law and this bloody mess, and now all of a sudden we have the gospel of grace that's revealed. Longing transforms obedience, and so just as gradually as the tide lifts a grounded ship. There's one other important similarity between the schoolboy and ourselves. If he is an imaginative boy, he will quite probably be reveling in the English poets and romancers suitable to his age sometime before he begins to suspect that Greek grammar is going to lead him to more and more enjoyments of the same sort. In other words, what he loves to do, it's just a different world, you know. I'm just thinking about now a world if people had these things, you know, these phones, these smartphones. It's changed. It's changed everything. I don't know, if I were an educator, I would not be allowed, I don't know what the context would be, but I would not be able to allow them to have this in the classroom because it's just so distracting and so forth. But it also changes the way we even learn and the way we think, but that's another matter. He may even be neglecting his Greek to read Shelley and Swinburne in secret. You see, I'm not sure if we'd be doing that, but in other words, the desire which Greek is really going to gratify already exists there. There's something he comes to love, the poetry itself, and is attached to objects which seem to him quite unconnected with Xenophon and the verbs in me. Now, if we are made for heaven, and it brings me back to study of Greek when I was in Dallas Theological Seminary, and learning about that was fascinating. And I can say my own experience. After a while, I began to love the Greek more for itself. After a while, you've got enough, and you begin to see, this opens up the door to you, and it becomes a vehicle, not a means, but actually an end. You see, because it brings you into what you're looking for and amplifies your understanding of the text of Scripture. Now, if we are made for heaven, here's a key point. The desire for our proper place will already be in us, and that's my point. It's already there. Just not attached to the true object, will even appear as a rival of that object. And this, I think, is just what we find. No doubt there is one point in which my analogy of the schoolboy breaks down. The English poetry which he reads when he ought to be doing Greek exercises may be just as good as the Greek poetry to which the exercises are leading him. So that in fixing on Milton, instead of journeying on to Aeschylus, his desire is not embracing a false object. But here's a key phrase here. But in our case is very different. And here's the thing I want you to zoom in on. If a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be in some way, some degree fallacious. That's a key theme. if you are pursuing something, if you are meant for something that goes beyond time and beyond space, something that's bigger, it's infinity, something bigger than the creation itself, but the one who made it, then if you fix your desire, your ultimate desire, on anything less than that, it's not enough. And so, in speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, in which we find ourselves, I feel a certain shyness. I'm almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you. The secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia or romanticism and adolescence. The secret also which pierces with such sweetness that when in very intimate conversation the mention of it becomes imminent, we grow awkward and affect to laugh at ourselves. The secret which we cannot hide and cannot tell, though we desire to do both. We cannot tell it because it's a desire for something that has never actually happened in our experience. We long for something that we've never experienced yet. That's what I point. And I'm going to say that he's trying to show you that's in you. Every one of you has this deep secret longing. We cannot hide it because our experience is constantly suggesting it. And we betray ourselves like lovers at the mention of a name. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that had settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify with certain movements in his own past. But all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would not have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. The books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trust to them. It was not in them. This is it. The most wonderful experiences you've ever known of beauty, intimacy, and adventure were not in those things, but they were pointers to something beyond. So it was not in them, it only came through them. And here's where he's saying here, and what it was longing, what he calls Sehnsucht, this longing that he describes. The beauty, the memory of our own past are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshipers. They are not the thing itself, they are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we've never visited. Interesting image, isn't it? And it reminds me of a thing that I have been doing a lot. You know, I do this thing with the slingshot. And remember, I talk about what are the greatest images I've ever known in the past? And can I slingshot them as hints of better goods to come that I cannot yet name, but they're hints of something more beautiful, something more wonderful, patches of godlight in the woods of our experience. And I talk about beauty, intimacy, and adventure, those three. And those moments every one of you have known, what's the most beautiful thing you've ever known, the most powerful moment of intimacy, the greatest adventure that you wish it would never stop. Those are hints of something better. But I'm going to argue that those are hints of a good that you cannot yet name, because it's not those things themselves, but they're pointers to a greater good that's not in this world, if that makes sense. And I think that's where he's trying to go here, and to say that you can't just, it's something a scent of a flower we haven't found, the echo of a tune we haven't heard, news from a country we have never visited. Do you think I'm trying to weave a spell? Perhaps I am. But remember your fairy tales. Spells are used for breaking enchantments as well as inducing them. And you and I have need of the strongest spell that can be found to wake us from the evil enchantment of worldliness, which has been laid upon us for nearly 100 years. And here's a key phrase. Almost our whole education has been directed to silencing this shy, persistent inner voice. Almost all of our modern philosophies have been devised to convince us that the good of man is to be found in this earth. And that is why I've seen most believers that I know are doing the same thing. Most believers I know would want to have more time on this earth rather than to be in their in the heavenly realm. Especially because we live with greater comforts, options, luxuries, and possibilities than any generations have ever known. So it's even more like heaven in our silly minds than ever before. And so we conflate and confuse, like that line from Bob Dylan when he says, don't go confusing paradise with that home across the road. You see, you compare it to another thing. Oh, bigger, better, more is going to be. If I can find my joy in this earth, and everyone knows who've tried that experiment that it never works, because as soon as you give something what they thought they wanted, it was never enough, was it? Because we were meant for something transfinite and transtemporal, and nothing else will be big enough. He says, yet it's a remarkable thing that such philosophies of progress or creative evolution themselves bear reluctant witnesses to the truth that our real goal is elsewhere. When they want to convince you that Earth is your home, notice how they set about it. They begin by trying to persuade you that Earth can be made into heaven, thus giving a sop to your sense of exile on the earth as it is. Next, they tell you that this fortunate event is still a good way off in the future, thus giving a sop to your knowledge that the fatherland is not here and now. Finally, lest your longing for the transtemporal should awake and spoil the whole affair, they use any rhetoric that comes to hand to keep out of your mind the recollection that even if all the happiness that they promised would come to man on earth, yet still each generation would lose it by death, including the last generation of all, and the whole story would be nothing, not even that story forever and ever. I just watched this little thing on YouTube about time and about, and they tried to express how vast the cosmos and the cosmic time is, and how brief our time, the humanity has been relative to the length, the age of the universe, according to this mindset. And then we just, and how our brief little lives are in comparison to that. And it's like the width of a hair in comparison to these larger scales. But then he was trying to opine and say, oh, but isn't it wonderful? We do have to make the most out of life. But if you don't grasp what he's saying, and if you're thinking clearly, he's saying life is an episode between two oblivions. You're just here for the briefest moment, then you're gone. And what's going to happen to you? And after a few generations, who'll remember you? You'll be a name on a gravestone that nobody remembers. Is that all there is? Yet we try hard to try to turn this into heaven, and it's incredible. Then our longing, well, maybe we can get to another planet or something like that. It's just always this idea. And so, as if we could believe that any social or biological development on this planet will delay the senility of the sun or reverse the second law of thermodynamics. Do what they will then, we remain conscious of the desire which no natural happiness can satisfy. And that's what I think he's talking about here. That if there's any reason to suppose that the reality offers any satisfaction, nor does the being hungry prove that we have bread, but I think it may be urged that this misses the point. A man's physical hunger does not prove that a man will get any bread. He may have starvation on a raft in the Atlantic. But certainly a man's hunger does prove that he comes of a race which repairs its body by eating and inhabits a world where eatable substances exist. In the same way, though I do not believe, I wish I did, that my desire for paradise proves that I shall enjoy it, I think it a pretty good indication that such a thing exists and that some men will. A man may love a woman and not win her, but it would be very odd if the phenomenon called falling in love occurred in a sexless world. Here then is the desire, still wandering and uncertain of its object and still largely unable to see that object in this direction where it really lies. So you see, we have a desire. Has it been connected to where it comes from? And God's wired us in this way. Our sacred books give us some account of this object. He says, of course, a symbolical account. Heaven is, by definition, outside our experience. But all intelligible descriptions must be of things within our experience. The scriptural picture of heaven is therefore just as symbolical as the picture which our desire, unaided, invents for itself. Heaven is not really full of jewelry, any more than it is really the beauty of nature or a fine piece of music. The difference is that the scriptural image has authority. It comes to us from writers who were closer to God than we. And it has stood the test of Christian experience down the centuries. The natural appeal of this authoritative imagery is to me at first very small. At first sight, it chills rather than awakes my desire. And that is just what I ought to expect. If Christianity could tell me no more of the far-off land than my own temperament led me to surmise already, then Christianity would be no higher than myself. If it has more to give me, I must expect it to be less immediately attractive than my own stuff. Sophocles at first seems dull and cold to the boy who has only read Shelley. If our religion is something objective, then we must never avert our eyes from those elements in it which seem puzzling or repellent, for it will be precisely the puzzling or the repellent which conceals which we do not yet know or need to know. The promises of Scripture may be roughly reduced to 5 heads. These are 5. First, that we will be with Christ. Secondly, we'll be like him. Third, with an enormous wealth of imagery, that we shall have glory. Interesting. He's going to go into glory, and we're going to look at that next week. Fourthly, we shall in some sense be fed or feasted or entertained. And finally, he says that we shall have some sort of official position in the universe, ruling cities, judging angels, being pillars of God's temple. The first question I asked about these promises, why any of them except the first? Can anything be added to the conception of being with Christ? For it must be true, as an old writer says, that he who has God and everything else has no more than he who has God only. I think of the answer turns again on the nature of symbols. For though it may escape our notice at first glance, yet it is true that any conception of being with Christ, which most of us can now form, will not be very much less symbolical than the other promises, for we'll smuggle in ideas of proximity and space and loving conversation as we now understand conversation. And we'll probably concentrate on the humanity of Christ to the exclusion of his deity. You see, that's what's kind of an interesting thing for me when I consider this. This is a very interesting verse. From now on, we recognize no one according to the flesh, even though we have known Christ according to the flesh, yet we know him in this way no longer. If anyone's in Christ, he's a new creature. So seeing as they are going to be, as new creatures, is I think an analogy here. So he says, we talks about erotic imagery, but I'm not for a moment condemning those imagery. I hardly wish I could enter into it more deeply than I do, and pray I yet shall. But my point is this, that this is also only a symbol. It's but unlike it in others. It needs correction from the different symbols in the other promises. The variation of the promises does not mean that anything other than God will be our ultimate bliss. But because God's more than a person, unless we should imagine the joy of his presence too exclusively in terms of our present poor experience of personal love with all its narrowness and strain and monotony, he says, a dozen changing images, correcting and relieving each other, are supplied. So he's saying there are lots and lots of images that are given in the scriptures to describe that, but they're symbolical. I have to realize it's not going to be this thing. The best I can do is to take what I've known and as I say here, slingshot it back to that reality that I have known, the greatest images of the past, the greatest. So I go back to, what's the most beautiful thing I've ever known? Is it not a hint of something I cannot yet name? Remember, I've told you before that our bodies are caterpillars. You see, compared to the resurrected body, which will be a butterfly. So I similarly have a caterpillar imagination. And a caterpillar cannot imagine the life of what's to come. He doesn't have that analogy. Yet he is the same as that butterfly, and yet he isn't. It's the same DNA, but an entirely different body plan that comes. You see the analogy here? And I have a caterpillar imagination about heaven, and as I argue, this heavens and earth are also a caterpillar, and it's going to imagine what the butterfly will be. Now, there is one butterfly who now exists. There's only one person in a glorified, resurrected body, and that's the Lord Jesus. And I know him, but I haven't yet seen him. But one day the scriptures promise that you and I will be made like him. And that is a good word, because as he is, so also will we be in this world. So that your greatest, most wildest imaginations are only hints of better goods you cannot really conceive. And I'm saying it won't be less, it'll be better than that. That all we can do is fix our desires on certain things, but don't come to love them in themselves, or they'll become idols that'll break the heart of the worshipers. And so let me go back to this last thought, and then we'll close. So he's arguing here that that you don't mistake the things, the best you've ever known, the most What's the most fun thing you've ever known? What's the most beautiful thing you've ever experienced? What's the most intimate encounter you've ever had? Those are not the thing in itself, because if they become the thing in itself, they'll become a dumb idol. It'll break your heart. But rather, it is a hint of a better good that we have to trust him that he's providing for us and promising to us. And that's why I want us now to focus on this little statement here. If a trans-temporal, trans-finite good is our real destiny, then any other good on which our desire fixes must be, in some degree, fallacious, must bear, at best, only a symbolical relation to what will truly satisfy. I would like you to think about this around your table. What does he mean by trans-temporal, trans-finite good? As Augustine put it, Lord, you have made us for ourselves. What does he go on to say? And our hearts are restless until we find our rest in you. So nothing less than infinity and eternity is enough. And if you're fixing it to something that's finite and temporal, as most people do, even believers, they're trying to cling to this world rather than let the best of this world point to the better thing to come, because the things in this world are not the things in themselves. And if you try to attain them, go back to that, relive that moment, it'll become a dumb idol and it'll break your heart. But rather, it's a pointer, a hint of a better good that I cannot yet name. So I'd like you to focus on this. You and I were meant for infinity and eternity, and the only one who's big enough for that is the living God. What was your discussion like?
Real quick, I was telling these guys next week, I've done this once before. I'm canoeing across the Okefenokee, and I'm taking the great risk of taking my wife. So I told him, if you hear of murder in the Okefenokee next week,
Sounds like a novel.
I'll be playing the corpse. That's right. But the last time I went through, and it's very difficult. I thought it was going to be easy because canoeing's easy, but you're pushing through lily pads just for the first 2 days. But we came into a blackgum forest, and blackgum is tupelo, and it was the best smell I've ever smelled in my life. And the reason I'm taking my wife, it only comes in March. It's a very short window when the flowers bloom. I want her to experience that because that's a hint of heaven. The best we've ever had on this earth is a hint, I believe, of where we're headed. The best smells, the best visions, the best thoughts, the best fellowship. It's all going to be better.
That's a good word, yeah. Pleasures, because I think about the pleasures of this world here. I've shown you this before. And I just think of all the pleasures of this world, collecting and poetry and literature and architecture and discovery and imagination and so forth. But just start with these five senses here, and you realize all of them are going to be better in the resurrected body. What you're going to be able to see, what you're going to be able to hear, what you're going to be able to taste. The best meal you've ever known is only a hint of something far better that you cannot yet name, but it's going to be there in your capacity to touch and smell, let alone all these other things which will be as good as they are. They're going to be richer even then. Some people wonder, why'd you put math in there? Because
it'll be new math.
Yeah, you'll actually like math. But all these things, these experiences that God's granted us. So I love that idea. And by the way, you notice that with smell, it's one of those things that actually creates a longing. Sometimes you've actually had that experience because the smell and the taste often get connected. They're connected actually physiologically, go straight to the amygdala, bypasses the frontal cortex. And as a result, it goes right to the sense of recollection or emotion. And so sometimes smelling a certain thing, like a magnolia or a gardenia or something like that, can actually bring back a feeling. And it creates a longing sometimes like that. So imagine what it'd be like in your resurrected body. What will you look like? We're going to look a lot better than we do now, that's for sure. And our capacities will be so much vaster. And is that you? And you'll be ageless, and yet all ages at once. So No, you won't be disappointed. You won't say, but I thought, but you said, it won't be like that when you stand before him. Then you'll say, I never knew. If I'd only known. And that's the thing that I want you to think. If I'd only known, it would be so much better than I realized. What other thing did you come up with? Yeah. Oh. Someone's got
This is just another question, but we're talking about the schoolboy who is just kind of drudgery at first, but then it becomes a delight and pleasure as he learns more about it, and
Yes.
it becomes something that's now fascinating to him. I'm working with a lot of teen boys who are having that reading the Bible and trying to understand who God is still kind of drudgery, and they can't quite understand what they're reading and what's the best way to help them understand these things and move forward.
Yeah, being is more caught than taught, isn't it? In many ways, you're a model and exemplar. And if they see that you have loved it and they see that it's transformed you, that's kind of a personal invitation into something that transcends their experience. And you can say, trust me, it's going to be more than worth its while. It's almost like when the pleasure of getting into flow. When you just gain the skill that finally you don't have to think about the steps involved, whether it's your golf swing or whether it's any number of things if you have to think about the steps along the way, it's not natural, it's not fluid. But anytime you attain a skill, or it gives you a certain capacity of freedom, of flow that you didn't have before. So there'll be moments though that a breakthrough, and so I think that's the thing about it where. But I still remember the first time I came to faith in Christ, and I'd learned these scriptures as a kid, but they never made any sense to me. Only when I became a believer did they come alive. But even there, you have to kind of guide them into it and live them into it and show how this text really has, what does this mean, you and me and I and you, and things like that. And it becomes a matter of being an exemplar. And that's why a good master, a good supervisor, a good teacher will bring them into that, and said it's going to be more than worth your while if you stick with it. Yeah, there's another question. Yeah.
One of the ideas that came up here is that so much at our younger age, like when we're a kid, we live in wonder. We have an excitement.
That's
I'm
right.
taking my kids to Disney World and watching their eyes light up
Yes.
at the princesses that walk by. And I think about my dog when I take him out of the house, because his little world's our little square footage of our house, but I take him for a walk, go to the park, he's losing his mind. And Chuck brought up a story of seeing
Losing his
a
mind.
guy trying to leave his dog. They get to leave the park and the dog's laying on his back. I'm not leaving. This is heaven for me. And I think that's part of what sometimes we get so wrapped up in our world where we're just doing what we do as adults and we've lost our childlike wonder.
Yes.
And I think this really brings a beautiful picture
That's
of
what he's
back
doing.
to the wonder
Yeah,
of God.
go back to that sense of longing as a child, the childlike wonder, because otherwise you can see the seediness of the world. I remember seeing a circus once, but and it was amazing. There was a magic to it. But then once I was in the Boy Scouts and we the Cub Scouts, and we were brought behind the scenes, and we got to see behind the scenes, and all the magic went away. It was cheesy, and you saw all the seams and everything as it was, and you were disillusioned, you see. But then you don't want to become cynical, you see. But actually, there is something that it's not the thing itself, and that's the key. He's trying to say, don't mistake them for the thing, or they'll become a dumb idol that'll break your heart. But on the other hand, you've got to train yourself to long for more, not less. Because most people settle for things that are going to not matter in the end. And they give their time and their attention, and they're trying to cling to this world rather than to realize this isn't it. There's something far better that you have yet to know. But take use your imagination, create a sense of growing longing. Longs for so much that you finally admit that nothing on the earth is big enough to sustain it. I think that's what you want to do, is train that childlike wonder. And there, I'm going to close with that contrast I've given you before. The difference between childishness and childlikeness. There's a huge difference. Paul says, I learned to put away childish things. but you do not want to lose your childlikeness. Too many people, when they put away childish things, lose the sense of mystery, magic, awe, and wonder. No, I want you to have what I call the second naivete. The first naivete is childish. The second is childlike wonder, sense of awe. I define the second naivete, childlikeness, as the inability to be bored.
Like that.
Yeah, it's an interesting way of looking at it.